Hey y'all, I've been keeping tabs on the meta throughout all of Amphoreus, and there's one commonality throughout all of its casts that I've picked up on. Every single one of them has a way to mitigate damage in some form, and this has had a definite influence on how sustaining has become significantly harder in today's meta. Let's first look at Memosprites. The very act of having a Memosprite as a fifth body to soak up damage already helps keep your team alive, but our three earliest Memosprite users have more than just that. RMC's technique comes with a 50% delay per wave, which is about as strong as it sounds. Heck, some meme showcases have made use of Sampo's 25% delay, so imagine twice that effect on an actually good character. Their skill also heals Mem for 66% of their max HP at level 12, letting the pink furball take even more hits. Aglaya's Garment Maker is CC immune and gets a 50% max HP heal on their skill, but, more importantly, a full heal with each Aglaya ult. Since Aglaya's entire team and game plan revolves around spamming her ult as much as possible, this ends up making her team deceptively tanky under the right circumstances. And while Caster's Netherwing both lacks on-field presence and tends to get blown up immediately, it can absorb fatal damage while it still remains on-field, and provides a decent AoE heal upon death to help offset Caster's HP drain. Can't go without mentioning that global passive too, as a butterfly on top of it all. More than personal gimmicks though, their ability to keep the team healthy manifests in their offense. RMC can time a Mem advance, or multiple, right before the enemy's next turn. Aglaya's blazing fast speed favors her to dispatch enemies before they get to move, and Caster's massive self-drain plus healing conversion into ult charge mandates a healer for her best performance. There are also your more traditional HP tanks to consider, specifically the ones that can stack HP from self-buffs. Each of the three units this applies to has a unique way of doing it. Triby's HP gain scales off the whole team's, Mighty's HP gain is a whopping true 1.5 times multiplier, and Hyacinth's HP gain applies to the whole team, much like Bailu's and Fu Xuan's. To go further into things, Triby's ability to gain energy independent of her own turn lets her build HP boots, and her best in slot planar gives 12% more HP. Her S1 further allows her to stack more HP by forgoing an energy regen rope, and while this on its own might not sound impressive, you have to remember that this is in competition with other supports. In other words, a role that more often than not tends to be a liability for how squishy it is. All of a sudden, 5 to 6,000 HP or more starts seeming a lot more attractive versus that Ting Yun with much less. Mighty also has way more survivability gimmicks, obviously, being CC immune, having a blast taunt on his ult that lasts for 2 turns, an ult that he also heals him for 20%, and of course, the real kicker, 3 free revives per fight without losing any vendetta downtime. He can still get more after the fact too, but realistically most players will never need more than the first 3 to finish the fight anyways. Hyacinth also gets the Gallagher bonus of 50% effect res, and the Bailu bonus of reactive heals, plus it's for any HP loss incident, not just direct attack damage. Unique to herself as well is the ability to turn speed past 200 into outgoing healing, a neat little bonus that makes use of what would have been wasted stats otherwise. Of course, though, how could we mention tanks without mentioning the ultimate tank? If you thought Firefly was tanky, wait till you see Phynon fly into the scene. After ulting, he gains a whopping 270% HP, each of his attacks heal 20% max HP, which is quite significant after that massive HP steroid, and when he counters, he gains 75% damage reduction. Yeah, there is no enemy in the game right now that is killing him. And it's only him, because by kicking out the entire rest of the team and going Super Saiyan, he makes him untargetable as well. Plus, if he somehow manages to die in his ult form, he just comes back with 45% of his max HP. He's the gift that just keeps on delivering. And as for the other 2 Amphoreus cast members not mentioned so far, they specialize in using debuffs to stay alive. Cypher has 10% damage reduction on her skill, and can even break quantum weak enemies quite handily with their super speed and 20 toughness follow-ups. As for Anaxa, his ult lets him block any extra actions for like 50% of bosses in the game, and guaranteed on all other enemies. Not to mention the sheer sustaining power of letting every unit in your team contribute to toughness damage unconditionally. Heck, even helps Cypher be more reliable with her own Quantum Break if you want to use them together. And unlike the debuffers of yore, these 2 are quite a bit easier to build and use. Cypher's low EHR requirements gives her more flexibility than other Nihilities to go fast and stay tanky, further boosted by the rather unfortunate fact that her damage can be quite negligible. If you really wanted, you could run a tank rope too, since she doesn't particularly care for spamming her ult. The ease of use part comes with their follow-up. Any attack triggers it, something I feel that Hoyo inherited from Fei Xiao and then later passed on to Kafka. Anaxa is not a nihility and therefore needs no EHR whatsoever, giving him similar, if not greater stat flexibility than Cypher. Plus, his basic and skill regen the same number of energy, meaning his ult rotation is uber consistent. Now, some of you might have noticed that some of these characters actually fit into multiple categories. RMC's delay makes them a Memosprite debuffer, at least somewhat. Hyacine is obviously a Memosprite tank, and so is Casterus for that matter, and even Tribi can match Cypher's Quantum Break in pure fiction. Point is, though, that every single Amphoreus unit, in some way, shape, or form, has one or even multiple layers of added protection. In fact, this even transferred over to our buff 3.4 units. Blade now gains charge from healing, incentivizing sustains on the team, but on top of that, he also gains 1000% taunt value from his skill, letting him soak every bit of damage like he always wished for. While the degree to which Jingliu truly benefited from 3.x buffs is arguable since her new best-in-slot team is identical to the rest, it is an indisputable fact, however, that new Jingliu is a whole lot more tanky. Being an HP scaler that wants to run HP body as well due to crit damage saturation will do that. And, well, the debuffers of yore I mentioned earlier also got reworked to feel much better. Silverwolf's more spammable ult and higher base chances make her already existent 10% attack down bug much more consistent, and much like Cypher, let her run tankier stats with more liberty. Kafka might be the only exception at the present moment, since DOT doesn't have any damage mitigation unless you count E4 Jiao Cho, nor did she get any additional mitigation of her own. Still, more self-DOT triggers means less reliance on enemy turns to deal damage, which one could argue is damage prevention in its own way. Side tangent, man am I glad they finally have EHR to attack conversion traces, making it a much less wasted stat on them. Sure, converting it to res pen or speed instead would technically have been nicer, but can't complain with what we got. So what happens when every single new option has some form of sustain in their kit? Well, of course, Hoyo modifies the enemies to make you want said sustain more. 2 new attack types, Sweep and Distribute, were added starting from 3.1. Both are significantly less threatening the more allies you have on the field, and adding Memosprites is the only way to increase that. There is a corner case of Mighty enjoying more hits, but you really shouldn't run, say, a 3-man Might team to just have him take more damage from the occasional burst. In combination with these attack types, quite a few unremovable statuses were also added. Everyone's new favorite elites, the Noontide Griffin and Moonlit Pegasus, apply sun-shaped marks of Aquila and moon-shaped marks of Orynyx respectively in a sweep and bounce pattern, so more allies means less overlap. Should 2 or more of these marks overlap, Energy Drain, Entanglement, or both will hit your allies along with 25% max HP worth of damage. Great for tanks who want to lose a lot of HP, bad for squishy teammates. Next is probably my favorite of these new mechanics, Corrosion. Anywhere from 50 to 80% of the HP you take, depending on the enemy, is stored as dark red corrosion HP, which can be healed based on the amount of enemies you hit. Also great for tanks and bad for squishies, since this refund mechanic justifies enemies to deal higher upfront damage. The reason I like it though, is because provided you can survive the initial burst, there is actually a small advantage to not having a healer on the team, thanks to this mechanic always being active and therefore providing a delayed but permanent 50 to 80% damage reduction. And since the upside for clearing corrosion is relatively small, it creates an interesting dynamic where lots of non-5 target attacks are ideal for maximizing HP gain. FYI, corrosion does also let allies effortlessly heal with any attack, reviving them from Casterus' global passive, so there's that too. Speaking of Casterus though, Pollux's unique unremovable permanent dot is the third unremovable status I'll be mentioning. Constant HP loss for turn helps pretty much all the HP scalers. Initially, Blade used to be the only character who liked HP loss per turn, but now Jingliu and Hyacine are also fans of this mechanic, and the fact that it's max HP loss also helps Mighty and Casterus, who want to drain as much as possible. Check my 3.2 MOC Pollux guide for more details, but there's also these ways in which Pollux specifically favors Memosprites and tanks. And well, she also doesn't remove debuffs on phase change, meaning she aids her remaining Amphoreus cast in Cypher and Anaxa too. While with a healer, any character can easily survive the Pollux fight, Pollux's mechanics are much more favorable towards tanks and Amphoreus units with other forms of damage mitigation, and it's still a scarier fight for squishy units. With that said, how else do you increase the need for sustains? That's right, attack inflation. Version 3's MOC represents the first time we had enemies' base attack increase. 3.1 enemies have a whopping 18% more attack, though luckily this is somewhat offset by the 30% HP buff and max HP refund on every hit. Still, this change boosts HP scalar survivability disproportionately more, to the point where tanks can literally heal off of some enemy attacks. 3.2 only had an attack increase of 5%, which, while more than 0, isn't much, but I've just discussed how Pollux promotes a tankier Amphoreus meta anyways. By far the worst offender though, and part of the motivation behind this video, is the current 3.3 MOC, a 20% attack increase on True Sting's side, and a 15% attack increase on Hoyo's side. Two bosses who deal immense amount of damage through frequent dots and attacks respectively, and not even a survivability buff this time built in to compensate. Every single form of damage mitigation responsible to help you through with this lineup counts. Especially if running Sustainless, but honestly even with Sustains not named Hyacine. Endgames where this level of damage is the norm are very concerning, and I'd like to hope that this isn't a sign of the future we have to deal with. Luckily, Pure Fiction is without direct increases to enemy attack, though the way Sustains are nevertheless encouraged is a bit more subtle. Across the board, more kills are needed to finish off each wave, and since new enemies spawn at around 25 AV, it's way more likely that your team runs out of steam before needing to tank the new spawn's onslaught. But what's absolutely crazy is the change to Wave 3. Not only do you have to kill more enemies to pass, but rather than 20% of the spawns being elites, 100% of them are. Like seriously, look at how much the HP of the weaker mobs has spiked in just 4 versions. This situation probably deserves its own video, especially seeing how there are certain AoE nukers that are to blame, but for now just know that being unable to blaze through these mobs means longer fights, which means more damage and threatening situations. Apocalyptic Shadow, just like MOC, also suffers from attack inflation. Not only was Fantility's attack increased by 15% in 3.0, but the newly introduced Garasabaz is all about dealing huge AoE damage and CC that also directs all Gnostics to focus a single target down. Stings, by the way, with the same level of bulk as Wave 3 Pure Fiction mobs. 3.1 boosted Aventuring's attack by 8%, but luckily Bananas was kept the same. However, its toughness was also increased by 30, meaning that if you weren't using the Herda, Tribute, or RMC, this botch was much harder to bust open. Full heals on break were also introduced here, which helps Sustainless run some, but especially assists the tanks who can turn that massive healing into damage. 3.2 brought back Garasabaz again, with no attack increases thankfully, but this time bulkier than ever, and Hoyo was introduced as well. At this point we can all kind of infer that this fight was a testing grounds for Finon's kit, but as a prototype and not the real thing, self-sustain and high toughness damage were both essential for the duelist facing Hoyo. 3.3 Apocalyptic Shadow had a flat 10% attack increase across the board, but with both bosses having basically unavoidable nuke periods, Cocolia via her phase 2 bombs and potentially unlucky Japar targets in phase 1, and Kafka with those stupid dinos at the start of phase 2. The fact that using Caster's global passive to kill Robin for an earlier ult was a semi-consistent strategy should give a picture as to how badly solid sustained power was wanted for this stage. And one other thing about MOC bosses, all of the new ones lock damage behind their turns, whether through spawning summons that deplete a portion of their max HP when killed, like Mikador, having damage reduction that largely relies on their turn to remove, like Pollux, or combining the two mechanics like Flame Reaver. This means that you're forced to wait until the boss's action to deal the maximum amount of damage, or in Pollux's case, any meaningful damage at all. For those of you that have caught on that this isn't actually inclusive to Amphoreus bosses, and that True Sting also summons stings on its turn that inflict both Vald and max HP when killed, that's correct. On that note, True Sting has come up 2 times in version 3's MOC, and has even had its behavior adjusted to spawn stings more consistently, making it behave more like its friends in Amphoreus. This trend of MOC bosses having damage windows, incentivizing or sometimes forcing you to wait for their actions, of course, means taking more damage in return, once again raising the sustain requirement, even higher factoring in that attack increase. The fact that boss actions can directly translate to more damage punishes Break, whose sole purpose is to delay boss actions, and non-nukers, teams that prefer to deal constant streams of damage rather than save it for huge bursts when the enemy is truly vulnerable. Pure Fiction having more bulkier waves to push through also encourages sustain through lengthening fights. Because of this though, it becomes even more imperative to damage the entire wave at once to stay on pace, leading to the unfortunate side effect of further disadvantaging single-targeted blast units compared to Pure Fiction's previous format. Apocalyptic Shadow, meanwhile, already has dangerous, normally unavoidable burst windows, further augmented by its newest bosses, and so the attack increase here hurts especially more. With that said, this is also the rotation period for Apocalyptic Shadow that introduced a full heal on break. Shouldn't this ease up sustain requirements and even open the door to sustainless runs rather than making sustains more necessary? In theory, yes, but not always. Sustainless comps require a certain level of investment, whether in Eidolons, signature light cones, relics, knowledge, RNG, or all five. Not accounting for even one of these factors can be the difference between life and death, and quite understandably, most players don't put in the effort needed to make this their go-to playstyle. And as mentioned before, enemies have gotten stronger. Teams aren't trying to survive in the same scenarios anymore. Those scenarios have unquestionably gotten harder with every passing version. Not to mention that the incentive to go sustainless decreases more and more overall with each passing version. Let's look at the commonly cited sustainless teams and what makes them hard to pilot this way. For counter-based teams like Yun Li, Blade, and Maide, where the DPS soaks up damage and heals it back up, too much focus on the DPS can still lead to them dying. Even for truly immortal counter units like Maidemos, they can't fully block AoE, bounce, sweep, and adjacent blast damage. For break teams like Firefly, Rappa, and Boothill, besides any disadvantage that comes with breaking Amphoreus bosses, which is notable already, they're still susceptible to periods of burst damage at the start of each wave, while still working on breaking the enemy, or right after phase changes where they have to restart the break process all over again. Reducing these windows of vulnerability is dependent on high speed, which is locked behind Dance 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 and E2 Fugue a lot of the time, and especially weakness break efficiency, which is locked behind Ron Mei, and most notably, E1 Fugue. For nuke teams like Fei Xiao, Aglaya, and Finon that focus on killing the enemy before they themselves are killed, vertical investment is usually necessary to hit the right damage thresholds for eliminating key threats, if not in Eidolons and Light Cones, then in good relics, which take very little amounts of time and resources to earn. And once that nuke period is over or on break, all of a sudden your whole team is vulnerable again, especially since all hitting on damage requires sacrificing tank stats in the process. And it's not like sustained teams are straight up inferior in every way either. Being able to take hits can be turned into a resource. All of our HP scaling DPS as of now directly convert HP loss into charges for more damage, whether frequency based like with Blade, Jingliu, and Hyacine, or through the sheer amount, like with Mighty and Castorus. Even if you're not an HP scaler though, being able to safely tank lots of hits translates to lots of energy, either guaranteeing or speeding up certain ultimate rotations. Listed below are a few notable examples, but pretty much any character with an energy system, given enough hits, can speed up their next ult by one or more turns. And with the sustain meta being what it is nowadays, there are quite a few scenarios where sustains can offer similar or better support than pure supports can. Aventurine can spam follow-up for a ton of fade charges versus Hule, or other attack spammers, and if you have his S1, Acheron charges too. Gallagher's unique package of Quipoko Energy, SP, Fire Single Target Toughness, Attack-Based Healing, Self-Debuff Immunity, and debuffs make him an excellent choice for teams that need a lot of those said traits. Huohuo's team-wide energy gain still has yet to be replicated to this day, unless you count Finon's or Multiplication's one-time energy boost at the start of battle, the latter of which Huohuo can also equip. Lingsha also has the highest AoE attack frequency in the game, useful for fueling Jade, the Herta, and for being her own break sub DPS. The fact that one of these attacks procs at only 60% HP or below further adds to the advantages of being able to soak up lots of damage. And well, if you've been seeing a distinct lack of zero cycles with sustain in showcase titles recently, Hyacine is probably the one who put the nail in that coffin. Not only is she a genuine HP support of her own, providing team-wide max HP as well as acting as an insane battery for trainers like Castorus, Blade, and Jingliu, her frequent attacks also make her excellent with Fei Xiao arguably, and Acheron if you have her S1. And of course, her personal damage is no slouch either. Between all the choices we now have, zero cycling with a sustain when the sustains also help to carry the team just isn't as impressive as it used to be anymore. All this leads me to say that Amphoreus characters aren't just being sold on damage to be competitive. They've also all got to have some sort of survival in that package too. Like, not every new character is going to bust his ceiling open. Finon is a great example of that, but you can bet that all of them will raise the floor. And this seems to purely be an Amphoreus thing. The Herda and the Fake Collab units are a return to the pure DPS model, and so I don't expect this sustained meta, so to speak, to be a permanent fixture. What I do worry about lasting, though, is the increased attack and enemy threat levels. Much like with HP Inflation, this seems to be only the beginning of a concerning trend, and we might be reverting back to the 1.0 days of asking ourselves if the new character is enough of a comfortability upgrade to let us even survive Endgame. Hopefully this is unfounded, especially since by the time I can make a multi-patch meta-analysis like this, it's usually on its way out. Only time will tell if this worry proves to be unfounded or not. What do you guys think, though? Has sustaining Endgame gotten noticeably harder? Have we been sleeping on Caster's global passive? And are those HP and defense percent subs finally starting to see use on your account now? Let me know in the comments below. With that said, thanks for watching and have a great day!